Good evening, class. My name is Tarana Hamilton, and my presentation is on the variables, research problems, and questions of the Introduction to Statistics. Where it all begins. The beginning of any question is curiosity, the desire to figure out a question, to figure out a problem, or to solve a problem. Once the curiosity is there, the desire to find the answer begins. Research begins when an issue or problem needs or wants to be solved. Now we must ask ourselves, what exactly is research? According to Google, the definition of research is the systematic investigation into and study of materials and sources in order to establish facts and research new conclusions. A research problem is a statement that asks about the relationship between two or more variables. However, almost all research studies have more than two variables. Research questions versus hypothesis. Research questions and hypotheses can be deceptively complex because they can be mistaken for each other. They're used in similar ways to get different responses depending on the research method that's being used. A research question is stated in the form of a question, while a hypothesis is stated in the form of a specified statement, usually with more details being used. A hypothesis is based on logic, reasoning, background knowledge, and deduction, and is based in the research question that's being asked. However, a research question is more based on the curiosity and wondering of the person forming the question. For example, a research question could be, is discovery learning in the classroom better than student-led discussions? The hypothesis is based on the research question. So therefore, a hypothesis is a statement of which you believe to be true. So you could say student-led discussions lead to higher test scores and happier students. An example of a research problem includes the following. A format example is, the research problem is to investigate whether independent variable 1, or a group of variables here, and independent variable 2, if any, here, and independent variable 3, if any, are related to dependent variable 1 here, and dependent variable 2, if any, in population here. This is just a format or template to get you started so you know where each variable could go and where the population would be if you use this format, but there are various ways you could write the research problem. For example, it says the research problem is to investigate whether people who train in martial arts are less stressed at work or school. So if you remember previously, a research problem is just a question. A hypothesis would be, I believe that, but a research problem is just something you're curious about. So this is just a curiosity, which is why there isn't a distinct answer or belief. Types of research questions. There are 3 types of research questions that we will go over. The first being difference. A difference research question is when you compare variables to each other. This is usually when you compare 2 or more variables. For example, do students with low and high reading levels affect classroom behavior? The next type of research question is called associational. Associational is, are events associated or correlated with each other? For example, is there a positive correlation between reading levels and classroom behavior? A positive correlation is when one variable goes up, the other goes up. When one variable goes down, the other variable goes down. So, the lower a student's reading level is, the worse their classroom behavior is. The higher their reading level is, the better the classroom behavior will be. The final type of research question is descriptive. Descriptive is when you question what is happening. For example, what are the reading levels of the students in the class? This is where you get specific and find out in detail what are the actual reading levels of the students in the class. Research hypotheses. Research hypotheses have very specific and detailed predictions embedded inside of them. They are written as statements, while research questions are written in question form. For example, a research hypothesis would sound like the following. Students who read at least 2 grade levels below their current grade level will average more behavior reports than students that read at or above their grade level. This research hypothesis is making a direct statement of what the researcher believes to be true, and that any student who reads at least 2 grade levels below whatever grade they are in will average more behavior issues, which will be linked to behavior reports, than any student that reads at or above their current grade level. So basically they are making a prediction. Now that we've been over research problems, questions, and hypotheses, now we will go over what are variables. Variables are key elements in a study. The definition of a variable is a characteristic of the participants or situation in a given study that has different values. So the values must be varying or different in the study. So for example, age and gender. So as far as age goes, you can be any age. So you can be 18, 20, 50, 60. So those are varying or different values of the variable age. Now gender, you can be male, female, transgender, so there's varying genders. If the value is the same, that's called a constant. So if the value never changes in the variable, that is called a constant. There are 3 different types of variables. Variables are defined operationally, or how are certain variables measured. There are extraneous variables, independent variables, or dependent variables. Now we will discuss what independent variables are. Independent variables are what are being changed or manipulated during the experiment. There are 2 types of independent variables, active and attribute. An active independent variable is given to the participant but not necessarily given or manipulated by the researcher. It is the aspect that is being measured for data. An attribute can't be manipulated, but is also an extreme focus of the research. So, for example, someone's IQ, a participant's ethnic group, age, gender, socioeconomic status, etc., something that they can't necessarily help. Next, we'll talk about dependent variables. Dependent variables measures the effect of independent variables. Dependent variables have to have at least two variables. They can also be called dependent list or test variable. Lastly, we will talk about extraneous variables. Extraneous variables are variables that aren't of interest or importance in a study, but they could influence the dependent variable. They are also known as nuisance variables or covariates. Some examples of extraneous variables include temperature, time of day, characteristics of researcher, teacher, etc. The final example, we're going to put together a research problem and pick out the variables. The research problem is to investigate the effect of a new curriculum on grades, math attitudes, and spatial performance in high school students. The independent variable is the new curriculum. The new curriculum is the thing that is being manipulated or changed. The dependent variables are grades, math attitudes, and spatial performance. We are trying to see if grades change, math attitudes change, or spatial performance change based on the implementation of the new curriculum. The extraneous variables could be the teacher giving the new curriculum, the temperatures of the rooms, etc. Because these things are not the focus of the research or the experiment, however, they could very well have an effect on the results of the research or manipulate or change the dependent variables. Thank you so much for listening to and reading my presentation. I hope that it was informative. Have a lovely day.